Welcome to your daily dose of theological German. We are starting in on the second paragraph now of Paul Tillich's essay in his book here about the theology of culture. All right, so we have another long sentence today. Instead of doing multiple sentences, we'll just do this nice long typical German sentence with many clauses, and we'll try to deal with them one at a time. You'll see here this first clause has no verb. As we saw in a previous episode, Tillich does like to omit the sein verb where other authors might use it. And so you have to resupply it in this case in English because you can't really do it this way in English. But anyways, you have to say it is different in the systematic cultural sciences or something like that. What's different? Well, we've just come off of the introductory paragraph in this essay where Paul Tillich has talked about how in the sort of empirical sciences, you're trying to remove any kind of subjective perspective and you're trying to arrive at something that is correct in view of corresponding to some sort of absolute reality that's out there that you can just determine. And so here he's saying that's how the kind of the assumptions that science operates on. And yet it's different from that if you're trying to be systematic in the cultural sciences. And so we'll see why it is that he thinks it's different. In them, being the cultural sciences, then you have your main verb here in second position, as it always is. So you need a subject because you started with a prepositional phrase. So the subject comes after the verb, der Standpunkt, and that is in the nominative case there. It's a masculine noun. The viewpoint of the systematizer, you could say. I mean, this is kind of a weird word. When you look it up in the dictionary, you're going to get very little by way of definition, and certainly not anything that has a lot of context in English, typically. But it's talking about the person who is engaged in the systematic cultural sciences. And so it's the researcher, the scholar, the studier, the person doing the studying. And so you could just use some kind of translation along those lines. So in them, the perspective of the researcher, and then you go back to pick up your verb now, belongs to the, and this is a compound preposition and article, to the thing itself. It being the viewpoint of the systematizer, the researcher. So it is a moment in the historical development, or you could say evolution, the developmental history of the culture. It, again, being the work of the systematizer, the researcher, it is not only, this here is a compound word, so you have culture and then you have a participial form of to know, kennen, and so you want to say something like culture knowing. You could probably do a hyphenated term in English to capture some of this. So it is not only culture knowing, rather also, and you might want to resupply the verb there, rather it is also culture creating. And again, you have a compound word here as well. So these sentences, these clauses in the sentence are not super complicated as far as German syntax and grammar goes. Some of the terminology are things you're going to have to look up to totally understand what's going on, but they're not obscure terms by any stretch of the imagination. But here you have Tillich's theology of culture kind of in a single sentence. This is the classic point that he tries to make and then further develops in the rest of his work, where he talks about how to study culture is to create culture. And so that sort of puts any kind of theology of culture within a particular sort of epistemic framework that that is unique from other types of knowledge, at least certainly knowledge as it's conceived of in sort of the scientific worldview. If you think that knowledge exists in some fashion that corresponds to kind of an absolute reality, well, then if you want to have a theology of culture, that's the first thing you have to dispense with, is that essentially you're creating the reality that you're studying on some level. And so we're into classic Tillich, kind of weird, mind-bending, dragon eating its tail sorts of thoughts and ideas. Anyway, hopefully the rest of it is as exciting and we can try to stay more focused on German than Tillich's theology, although I find it very fascinating.